Hey mower fans, Chris here from Power Equipment Direct. Today we're going to talk to you about spring mower maintenance, what to do before you mow your lawn for the very first time for spring. In this video and in our spring maintenance guide, you're going to learn tips and things that will help you avoid common mistakes. All right, let's get started. Alright, so a lot of things I'm going to do on my mower, which is a HRR series Honda mower, is going to be very applicable to any lawnmower that you have. So a couple of things to keep in mind. This is a Honda overhead valve engine, runs very cleanly. It has a spark plug up front here where the piston meets the top of the engine here. And then also, this is the intake for the air. It goes through the carburetor, combusts in the engine here, and then this is the exhaust side on this side. So anytime you're tipping over your lawnmower to do some maintenance, always make sure that this side is up, that the intake, the air side where the air filter is, that is always facing up. You do not want engine oil pouring out into the carburetor, clogging up this carburetor and your air filter. That's very bad news. Okay, so a couple things to note on the side of the engine here. You've got your fuel shut off. Always good to keep that off while you're maintaining your engine. This is really important. This is the very first thing. Before you start any work on your lawnmower, always make sure you disconnect the spark plug first. That's very important. And all you have to do to disconnect that is remove the boot. Comes out really easily. You want to snug that back. Now there's no way for the engine to start. Okay, so what I got here is all the tools you really need to get started on your lawnmower maintenance from left to right. But first of all, you want to wear some gloves. Some of these chemicals get in your skin and then it's not too great. Also have some goggles if you're going to do any kind of spraying of chemicals. Alright, so over here I have a little bit of a lawnmower maintenance kit you can buy. You can get your air filter, your replacement blades, new spark plug. I really love a digital caliper if you're not always doing these kinds of jobs, just to measure if you have a bolt you're not sure what the size is and you're far away from the toolbox. This will save you some trips. Got your gas can here, torque wrench. A lot of guys, they don't use a torque wrench, they just do it as tight as they can. But if you want to protect from stripping the bolts out and you want to make sure that lawnmower blade is very secure, then I recommend using a torque wrench. I have a heavy duty ratchet with a 14mm size for the blades. Got a deep well socket. That's to get at the spark plug. Deep well is very important there. Alright, a couple other things. Shop towels are really good to have on hand. You want to have maybe a dirty rag if you're going to clean up the engine. I also recommend having a funnel, catch can, transfer pump. So this transfer pump is good if you're transferring your fuel, you still have something left in there. It's really important that you get that out. Instead of pouring gas everywhere, you can use a transfer pump. Here I've got some throttle body and intake cleaner. This is also a carb cleaner. This is really good to get any kind of gunk that may have accumulated over the winter time. Also for your connections, you want to make sure you kind of lubricate those connections, your cables and whatnot. Silicone spray is okay. You can use WD-40, but I recommend WD-40 for cleaning purposes. If you want a good lubricant, look for something specialized just for that purpose. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to take this cover off for the air cleaner and show you how to inspect this filter and also how to inspect the carburetor. So real easily, there's two tabs at the top here. If you have a different engine, pretty much the same. You can take this is a disposable filter. Some of them are washable. I like the disposable kind because it gets dirty, you toss it away, you get a new one, no big deal. A lot of people ask, can I take my air compressor and spray this out? The answer to that is no, you don't want to do that. And the reason for that is you might perforate the filter. The media in here is kind of thin. You're going to be damaging the engine and your carburetor and you won't even know it. So the best thing to do, and I've heard this from Honda themselves, take something that's really clean, like the back of the cover, and I knock it against the cover a few times. Like that. And you can kind of tell in the sunlight, you can pick up the light and you can see if there's a bunch of debris coming out of this. That will dislodge any big particles. The other thing to look for is how dirty this is. You want to shine it up to the light. If you can't see the light very well and it looks very black and dirty, that could indicate that you've got some oil buildup, maybe some fumes from the engine are coming back through here, and it's probably time to replace that. Another thing you want to look for is the edges. So if these edges are cracked or if they're brittle, it's no longer pliable anymore, replace it, get a new one. Because what's going to happen is air is going to come up through the edges here and it's going to bypass the filter completely. Okay, right now I'm going to show you how to clean out the air carburetor. Carburetor comes in right past this housing here for the air cleaner. What's interesting is these bolts go all the way through to the back of the carburetor and they kind of hold everything together. Very important not to take this apart unless you know what you're doing and you have the proper tools, but you don't need to do that. What I do is I always just clean that out, give it a quick burst of carb cleaner and inspect it, make sure that throttle plate moves back and forth freely. If it's really gummed up, then it might be time to take it apart and inspect further. But if you do this every year, you won't have to do that. Put your goggles on, and you can take this straw from the carb cleaner and kind of stick it inside there, kind of give it a push thrust past the throttle plate. A couple sprays of that is all you need. Make sure you can see past that throttle plate. All right, past this carburetor, underneath here is a fuel bowl. And there's a little nut at the bottom of the fuel bowl that if you undo that, you can release any old gasoline that might be in there, which is a good idea. The other thing you want to do is you take your silicone spray, look at any connections here that might need some lubrication, and give those a quick spray. I mean, you don't need much, just a little bit. Now that we have the carburetor all cleaned out, now it's time to put your fresh filter back on, put your cover back on. Now we're going to flip over the lawnmower and check out the lawnmower blades. Really important again is to make sure your air cleaner is facing up. And make sure that spark plug has been disconnected, so you want to double check that. So really quick, I can see there's some rust happening. Take out any debris that might be floating around here. Behind this blade system is a belt drive. I'm going to inspect that belt to make sure that it's not cracked or damaged. And also underneath where the engine lies, you want to make sure there's no buildup of debris in that. But this is very clean, so I don't need to do any kind of extra cleaning to this. This is just fine. Okay, now I'm going to take the lawnmower blade off using my socket and make sure that piece of wood is preventing this from spinning. Okay, so I always recommend when you take your lawnmower blades off that you set them aside exactly how they came off so you know how they go when you try to put them back on. It's also a good idea to get a second set of lawnmower blades, so that way during the season, if you need to take these off and sharpen them, you can put your new set back on, and vice versa. While you're having these off, you can go get them sharpened. So what I recommend, if you don't have that much wear and tear on your lawnmower blades, to do them, file them by hand, or you can do them on a bench grinder. But be careful if you do that, because you'll take off too much metal and it can become brittle. Also, what can happen is you can warp the metal, or they can be uneven, so that'd be really bad because it can cut the grass uneven, or worse, it can become unstable inside the mower. But if you have some really big gouges on the lawnmower blade, you're going to want to take them get them professionally honed. While you have your lawnmower blades off, it's a good idea to do a final inspection of the deck underneath and the belt drive system for the self-propelled. Okay, I recommend always using a thread locker to just give that extra protection that that bolt's not going to go anywhere. And you just need a little bit. Okay, now that it's hand tight, I'm going to go ahead and set my torque wrench to the proper setting, which is about 36 to 43 foot-pounds of torque. And I'm going to set my wrench for 40 pounds. And at this time, you want to put your piece of wood in here to prevent this from moving on you. Okay, now I got the bolts snug with the torque wrench. Now it's really time to torque them down, but do it evenly. Okay, that click tells you that there's enough torque applied to the bolts. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is inspect our spark plug. The spark plug boot should already be off when you're performing your maintenance. In case you're doing this step first, you just pop that off, and you want to make sure you get the right deep well socket, and in this case we're using a 22 socket. Okay, that's kind of it. After you get that loosened up, you can loosen it up more by hand. Now I will say one thing, if you've stored your mower outside all winter long, it's possible that this spark plug can get really rusted in there. So if it's really, really difficult to get off and you use some penetrating spray and it still doesn't come off, you can risk cracking this inside the engine. So be very careful. If it's really not budging and you're putting a lot of force on that, it might be time to take it in. Alright, so I'm inspecting my spark plug. I noticed that it looks very clean. I replaced it last year. I don't see any burn marks on the porcelain. There's no rusting. Yeah, it looks pretty good. There's no soot. So I'm going to just double check the gap and make sure that's in spec, and then I'll be good to go. Okay, so I've got my gap tool here, and we're looking for 0.7 to 0.8 millimeters. You see the back of this tool is in millimeters. So when I put this on here, I'm getting about 0.7, just a little under that before it comes tight. So that's perfect. That's exactly what we're looking for. Okay, now that we took our spark plug out, we inspected it, we checked the gap, which was 0.7 millimeters. It's good to go back in. What you want to be careful of is that you don't cross thread this. So you want to reverse thread this just until you hear a click, and then you want to start turning it clockwise. Hand tight all the way down. All right, now that it's hand tight, I can get my torque wrench on there, which is exactly about 14 foot-pounds of torque. So the reason why I use a torque wrench is because it's precise, and you don't want to risk having it over tight. And since it's an engine component, you want to make sure that it's in there the right way. And it's not a lot of torque, so you don't need to tighten it really that hard. And that's it. That's all you need. Really important is the engine oil. It's going to protect your engine. It's going to lubricate the engine, the cylinder wall, the piston ring. We're talking about lawnmowers that have a 4-cycle engine in it. Can I use 2-cycle oil? Absolutely not. Do not use 2-cycle oil. It's not formulated for that. You want to make sure you get the right weight. That's the most important. And also what's called the API service, the American Petroleum Institute service rating. And so right now, the best rating you can get is SN+. This will also say energy conserving. So if you just pick something off the shelf and you don't read the label, it could be really old oil that's using an old, outdated service rating. The owner's manual will also tell you what weight to get. Depending on where you live in the country, if you live in the northern states, you're probably going to want a 10W30 or something that has a dual grade to it. The 10W in 10W30 means winter. So that's just the lighter oil to get the engine moving before it gets up to operating temperature. The 30 weight is really what protects the engine while it's at operating temperatures. And a lot of times, if you're above 50 degrees all year round, you're not going to use that mower in the fall when it drops below 50 degrees, then you probably can go with a straight 30 weight. But always check your owner's manual. Can you just use the oil you use for your car? A lot of modern cars use the lighter weight oil. You don't want to use that because what happens in these heavy duty engines, they don't have the tight tolerances as you have for your automobile. So you're going to get a lot of blow-by, which means that oil is going to go past the piston ring and burn up in the engine. And so that's not going to, it's going to build up gunk over time. Okay, next thing we're going to do is change out the engine oil. Still have the spark plug disengaged. So you're going to open up your dipstick cap just like that, set it off to the side. And then very carefully, I use an open pan because otherwise this can get all over the place. So you want to keep your pan, if you're doing this by yourself, it's kind of difficult, but if you have a buddy or something, just have them tip over the mower and catch the pan below. It'll take a few minutes, especially if it's been cold. So just let it do its thing for a good 5 to 10 minutes and then come back to it. Okay, now at this point we have our engine oil back in the pan here. There might be some discoloring or milkiness. That's moisture that has gotten into it. You can kind of see, catching the light, how there's some metal shavings at the bottom of this pan, so it's really good that you're changing the oil. Okay, so filling up your engine oil, you want to take this really slow and make sure you don't overfill it. Okay, now that I added some engine oil, it's always important to check as you go. Wipe the dipstick off so you can see where your level is. And you do not tighten it down. You just stick it in there and then you pull it back out. And another thing you want to do is not hold it like this when you're checking it. You want to hold it horizontally or vertically with it pointing down. You also want to make sure you double check what the oil level is after you start it for the very first time. Okay, so for this engine, we want to be at least halfway at the hash marks here. So a little bit more and we should be all set. Okay, now that we drained all of our old engine oil out into the pan and put our new stuff in at the right level, now it's time to take our old engine oil, put it back into this old container here that we can then bring back to the place that we bought our new engine oil, and they'll recycle it for us. Alright, so what octane ratings should you use for gasoline? And that's highly debated. But what you should definitely not do is buy any gasoline that's E85 or anything over 10% ethanol. Ethanol is basically like a corn alcohol, and it will attract moisture from the atmosphere and build up water into the gasoline, and that will corrode the engine and all of the rubber components, so it might break down your fuel lines early. I highly recommend what's called True Fuel. For 4-cycle engines, make sure it says 4-cycle on it. It has no ethanol in it. It has stabilizer embedded into it. It also has friction reducers. Okay, the other thing you want to use when you get gasoline is stabilizer. You want to pour that in first. Just use the amount that it calls for in the instructions. All right, the last thing we're going to do is gas up the machine. Again, you want to use some stabilizer, and then you want to use fresh gasoline, only enough to last you a good 2 weeks. The last thing you want to do before you pull your lawnmower out to start cutting is to reconnect this spark plug boot wire to the spark plug. Just make sure it clicks in really nicely there. And that's it. That's all you need to do. Okay, before we take the mower outside, you want to check the condition of the wheels, make sure that they're secured properly, and set your mower's ride height. These notches indicate how many inches off the ground this deck is. It's about 1 inch per notch, so all the way up or all the way down will give you about 4 inches each way. Depending on where you live and the type of grass you have, I recommend at least 3 inches off the ground. I'm going to set my mower deck at the highest level here, at least until I get a feel for how it's cutting the grass and make sure it's all set. And if I need to lower it, I can do it. But again, this is the first time you're cutting your grass. You want to make sure that you're not going to scalp it. Inspect this pull cord here. Make sure there's no frayed ends to it. It's not coming apart. Last thing you want to do is have that snap and then wind up in here. You also want to lubricate these pulleys here, or these cables. Everything's moving nice and freely as it should. At these pulleys and these cables all are looking good. Okay, so that's kind of it. That's all you need to do. You've done your air cleaner, you've gotten the right gas, you checked the oil, made sure it's the right oil, you put the right amount of oil in, you've checked your spark plug, you checked your lawnmower blades, made sure they were sharp, and you put them back on with the right torque. You also want to make sure that everything looks nice and clean. For me, I take just a regular damp rag and I go around the machine and I clean it off really nice. I will say this, if people want to use a pressure washer, I don't recommend that. You can use soap and water, that's fine. I recommend just wiping the machine down each time. That way you don't have a big mess on your hands at the end of the season or the beginning of the season. Okay, now that I got my PPE on, I got my gloves, my hearing protection on, my eyes on, now I'm ready to start the lawnmower. But right before I do, I want to just do a once over and make sure everything is like it should be, okay? Got my gas. Make sure it's full. Tires are all at the same level. Your air filter is in there. Your fuel is in the on position. My spark plug is engaged. My engine oil is at the proper level. Okay, it started right up. As you saw, there was some little white puffs of smoke. That's perfectly normal for the first time. The reason being is I added a little tiny drop of oil to the spark plug port before I stored this over the winter to make sure it was lubricated. And I also sprayed a little carburetor cleaner into the carburetor to loosen up any gunk that may have been stored in there as well. Once I start this back up, you'll see it'll start cleanly. And if you continue to see white smoke, it might be an indication that the engine's wearing and you're getting some blow-by from the oil. You don't want to cut more than the very tips of these off, 1/3. If you cut half or more, then you're going to kill your lawn. Another good tip is the longer the grass is able to grow, the longer the roots are able to take over the lawn. It'll fill in bald spots and it won't let weeds take over your lawn. So that's it. I hope you enjoy the video. Please like and share it, subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.